number 8 on page 98. So if an essential defect is discovered before Mass, it must be remedied, and if it cannot be, Mass must not begin. So, obviously, if it is an essential defect, if it is discovered during Mass but before the consecration, it must be remedied, and if it cannot be, the priest must discontinue the Mass. The wine is bad, like you're at the offertory and you smell the wine and it smells like vinegar, you're done. Unless you can obtain good wine. So the... okay.
Sorry, you're to say Father Duterte was speaking to me.
Yeah, that's fine. Voila.
Oh, thank you.
But if you can't remedy it, you have to stop. Explaining the reason to the people if it is a public Mass. If an essential defect is discovered after the consecration, it must be remedied in the briefest way possible as provided for in the direction of De Defectibus. Right, and we're going to see those. If not today, then eventually. And Mass continued where it had been broken off. That should just be a period. If the defect cannot be remedied, in this case the Mass is continued to the end, omitting the words and signs which concern the defective species. It's general principles. If an accidental defect is discovered before Mass, it is to be remedied, and if it cannot be, Mass is not to be celebrated unless there is an obligation to celebrate it or a grave reason for doing so. That should be e.g. For example, if otherwise scandal could not be avoided. So an accidental would be something like I'm thinking like not having a maniple, or the maniple is worn out. It's something that obviously doesn't affect the liturgy of the Mass, but does pertain to the general rules. Yes.
So if it's Sunday and you can't get a maniple, you would still say
Yes. If it's a weekday Mass, forget it. Unless you had some other reason. In other words, people were waiting for Mass, scheduled Mass, or you were so poor that you needed the stipend. Yes?
Are essential things only things that pertain to the validity of the Mass?
Yes.
As you see, the last sentence, number 8, says the defect cannot be remedied. In this case, Mass is continued to the end.
Yes, we'll see these in specific. These are general principles. If such a defect be discovered during the Mass before the consecration, it is to be remedied if this can be done without causing scandal and if the succession of the parts of the Mass permits. Again, we'll see this in Specie. If it cannot be remedied, then if the defect is not grave, for example, the host is a little broken, one candle is burnt out and cannot be replaced, the Mass is continued. But if the defect be grave, that should be e.g. For example, both candles are extinguished and cannot be replaced. The celebrant is ill and fears he may vomit. The Mass is best discontinued unless there is a grave reason for not abandoning it. See, so if both candles go out on your private Mass on a weekday, you're done. unless there's some reason. You see, it's all sufficient reason. But it is actually considered grave to have both candles. Light matter if one is out, grave matter if both are out. So, yes.
Could you just relight them?
You could. Yes.
So is grave in this context the same thing as essential? Because it doesn't pertain to
No,
validity.
no. I mean, well, again, you want to say what is essential to. Usually, that would mean validity. But something can be not that pertain to validity, but could be grave matter if you omitted it. If you were to say mass in a sweat outfit, or a jogging outfit, or something like that, or or an Easter bunny outfit, as I heard some Novus Ordo priests do. We came out in an Easter bunny outfit it was in California years ago. 40 years ago. And ran up and down the sanctuary in an Easter bunny outfit. That was on Easter Sunday. It was not far from where you live either. But there could be things that are grave matter that would not affect the validity of the mass. If an accidental defect is discovered after the consecration, it cannot be remedied. Mass is to be continued. Let's see. So if both candles go out, and it's after the consecration, you continue the mass. Yes.
Sorry, Your Excellency.
It cannot be remedied.
If a priest needs to go to the bathroom after that he began the mass, is that a grave or something like that, or is just a?
Well, that's certainly a grave reason. In other words, can he use the facilities and then return to the mass? I don't know if that's covered in any of the. It would seem to me he could. I mean, that would be a legitimate interruption. It would seem to me he could. Arbitrary defects in the Mass, despite a custom to the contrary, which is expressly reprobated in the Code of Canon Law, the celebrant of Mass is to observe accurately and devoutly the rubrics of the Missal, and take care not to add other ceremonies or prayers by his own authority. I recently heard of a traditional priest who, on raising the host, says out loud, "Jesus, Jesus." Yeah. You can't do that. But sometimes they do things that are a little odd. Like holding the host up at the elevation for an excessively too long. It should be just a few seconds. And everybody, adding drama to the Mass. As I always say, the worst thing that I could ever hear about you is if a layperson says, "Father says a beautiful Mass." That is the worst thing that anybody could say about you. It's true. That means you're doing stuff. See, oh, isn't Father pious? The best thing would be he says a pious Mass, or he says Mass piously. That would be good. But the beautiful Mass, that means you're adding stuff. And priests do add stuff to make their Mass beautiful. Or kneeling at the first, they consecrate the host, and then they go down and they stay there for half a minute or a minute, staring at the host. I've seen that. The French are very prone to this stuff. That's where most of the time I've seen it. You go down, you touch the ground, you come up. Genuflection is an act, it's not a position. You're always moving in it. All right, so there's that. I've seen that stuff. Or not respecting the tones, for example, at a high tone, announcing every prayer of the canon. Qui pridie, and then every prayer of the canon is announced in a high tone. I've heard that too. Yeah, well, you see, you make. As one author pointed out, that you see the reason for this is to increase the devotion of the people. But one author pointed out, well, yes, and if the priest got down on his face to say the Confiteor, that would increase the devotion of the people too. There's all sorts of things you can do. Once you decide I'm going to do stuff to enhance the Mass, to increase the devotion of the people, well, where do you stop with that? All right. So, and take care not to add other ceremonies or prayers by his own authority. So, ideally, the Mass of each priest should be the same. In other words, where you don't really notice anything different about the way Father X says Mass and Father Y says Mass. Don't notice anything different about it. That's ideal. Arbitrarily to change in any way by addition, omission, or transposition the rite of the Mass is unlawful. So strict is the interpretation of this law that the SRC refused to allow the celebrant of Mass, for the purpose of gaining a rich indulgence, to pronounce even in a low tone the words "My Lord and my God" while looking at the sacred host at the elevation, and cited Canon 818 to justify the refusal. But if I recall, St. Pius X said even saying it mentally, by saying it mentally, you get the indulgence. But you're not allowed to say that Dominus meus et Deus meus. You're not allowed to say anything private during the Mass, except if you're mentioning names of people in the memento. But that you would do in the lowest tone anyway. But nothing devotional, private devotion. Not allowed to say anything. Yeah.
Is that indulgence unique then? I've always thought you had to move your lips for all the indulgences.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, Pius X made an exception to that.
Okay.
Because he was the one that added that. But he said you have to say it mentally because he didn't want to add anything to the canon. Mm-hmm. So great was the reverence for the canon that it's untouchable. And you know what Pius IX said when they said you should add St. Joseph to the canon? He said, "I'm only the Pope." Which is a great response. In other words, only God could do that. So that's why the adding of St. Joseph was symbolic that the canon can be smashed. And then they took him out in the new Mass. Whether the mutilation of the rite of the Mass would be a grave sin or a venial one, or no sin at all for a sufficient cause, is discussed by the moral theologians. Their reply that this will depend on the motive for changing. Is it due to contempt for the rubrics, to culpable ignorance of them, to gross indifference and carelessness, or from mere human frailty like inculpable forgetfulness or inattention, or from devotion of a wrong kind? All right. B, the nature and extent of the change. Is it one that seriously concerns the reverence due to the Blessed Eucharist? Does it occur in an important part of the Mass, important in itself, or because of some extrinsic reason, such as the mystical meaning of the part? Is the addition or omission serious because of its length? it is regarded as grave to make even a comparatively small change in the canon of the Mass because of its intimate connection with the sacrifice. And it is more serious to have omissions in the ordinary parts of the Mass, the parts that occur in every or almost every Mass, than in extraordinary parts, which occurs sometimes only. Thus, the omission of all the prayers of preparation at the foot of the altar, of the Gospel, of several of the offertory prayers, would be regarded as a notable omission. To omit the purification of the paten, unless there were no visible particles on it, or chalice, would be a grave want of reverence for the Blessed Sacrament. To omit the addition of water and wine in the chalice, or the fraction of the sacred host, or the commingling of the two sacred species, would be a serious omission because of the mystical meaning of these rites. But to omit the Gloria, or the Creed, or prayers of commemoration, or the last Gospel would not ordinarily be regarded as a grave omission. Okay. That doesn't mean you should do it. But arbitrarily to add prayers or ceremonies with the intention of introducing a new rite, or to a notable extent, especially prayers not found in the Missal, would be a grave violation of liturgical law. To add the Gloria on days when it should be omitted, like for a Requiem Mass, or collects not allowed by the rubrics, or ejaculatory prayers would not ordinarily be grave. See, there are certain prayers that are assigned, and you have to learn that in different seasons, the Akunctis and all of those. Those are all assigned. And sometimes on ferial days, you can say as many as 7 orations. And so there are 3 that you have to say, and then you can say 4 more ad libitum. But you have to keep track of the ones that you're saying because you have to switch around the Missal a lot. You see, so you have to know, because you have to say those every time, the collect, the secret, and the post-communion. But you're allowed as many as 7. Yeah.
Your Excellency, does it have to be an odd number?
Pretty sure, yes. The only exception is when the fidelium is added, and you have 4. If the fidelium is added on a day when you have ordinarily 3, and that's the day you would say it on a feria. The fidelium is added on a feria. And there's rules for that, and you have to learn those. But you have 4 on that day. Yes?
Is there a reason why it can't be an even number?
Somehow the church doesn't like even numbers. I really don't know, but it likes odd numbers, like 3 steps on the altar and things like that. You know, it's. I really don't know. And I believe there's a rule too that if the number of commemorations exceeds 7, you just stop. That could happen in Europe where you have all of these local saints, you know, all these martyrs and, you know, people that you never heard of. And you could be saying it could really add up. But yeah, there's a certain point where you just stop. See, the bishop can also order an oratio imperata, like for floods or wars or things like that. So then you have to say that one too. Now, you know, you wouldn't have that because we don't have ordinaries lying around. But there'd be other prayers that you might have to say, yes.
So, Your Excellency, some priests, they just skip up, no, not here, some priests, they just skip up the online prayers, even though it's not a part of the Mass. It's normal?
Well, it's not part of the Mass, so it really doesn't concern that. The argument Father Cicada gave from law is that if the object of the prayer is fulfilled, automatically the law is suppressed. For example, it expires. Let's say it expires. If there's a drought, that means no rain. The bishop says oratio imperata for rain, and let's say a hurricane comes, and floods, and, you know, the there's no longer, the law is fulfilled, you see. So that's a general principle of law. You see, so you wouldn't say the oratio imperata for rain. You know, you'd say contra tempestates. You know, you see, Pius XI said it was originally set down by Leo XIII for the Roman question, that is, getting back the papal states. But that was solved, you might say, at 1929. So then what do you do with the Leonine prayers? He said that the intention will be for the freedom of the church in Russia. The freedom of the church, meaning the Catholic Church, in Russia. And the Catholic Church is free in Russia. I said Mass in Moscow, all right? Nobody hindered me or in any way, you know. So the church is free in Russia. So Father Cicada said the law expires because it is no longer, you know. So that's the reasoning behind that they no longer apply. But there was in the 1950s, because Fatima became very popular in the 1950s, there was a mistake that the intention was for the conversion of Russia. Prayers for the conversion of Russia. Pius XI did not say that. It was for the freedom of the church in Russia. It's in the Acta. See, but because of, again, devotions and, you know, it's for the conversion of Russia. And, well, Russia hasn't been converted. And so now what? But Lucy said, oh, when Russia, you know, abandoned communism, so to speak, Russia was converted. But if that might have been the fake Lucy, though. I think there was a fake Lucy. I mean, I'm not one of those conspiracy theorists, but she looks pretty different, I'll say that. But anyway, that's what she said, that Russia is converted. So, it's sort of, who would know better than, because what does that mean, converted? Does that mean converted away from communism? Does it mean everybody becomes Catholic? What does converted mean? You see, so that was our father's argument. However, Pius XI said that these prayers must be said until they are rescinded. Now, what does that mean? Because that might mean that they are, you see, if a law is made in perpetuity, it simply means that there's no expiration of it. It's not made for 3 years or 4 years. It means that there's no expiration date. Did he mean that there's no expiration date on this? Then the general principle of law would apply that Father Cicada said. If he means that they have to be rescinded by the Vatican, then the law would still apply. See, you'd have to research that a little bit, what he meant by that, the actual quote in the Latin, and etc. You see, so that's you know, a minor controversy. In principle, I agreed with what Father Cicada was saying, but I always said them because I didn't want the lay people to be fighting about something else. So I figured they have their own value, they're wonderful prayers, why not just say them? You know, but prayers like that really don't belong after the Mass. I mean, it's a devotion that is attached to a liturgical thing. I mean, I could see the argument that it's not really a place for that. It would be better to have an oratio imperata in the Mass.
Yes. Your Excellency, some prayers also, because it's not a liturgical act, they take out the maniple, and then they leave on the altar to say the Little Nine prayers. Is this a reasonable?
That's legitimate because yes, it's not liturgical. You're done with the Mass. It's for example, bishops don't, but priests take off the maniple. It's optional though to take off the maniple, even for the sermon. It's optional. Some priests even take off the chasuble. Father Cicada used to take off the chasuble to give the sermon, but that's all optional. Okay. So, where are we now? Gosh, that was a big one. So, arbitrarily to add prayers or ceremonies with the intention of introducing a new rite or to a notable extent, especially prayers not found in, so to add the Gloria on days when it should be omitted, or collects not allowed by the rubrics, or ejaculatory prayers like Jesus, would not ordinarily be grave. I think that would be grave, though. In general, private vocal prayers may not be introduced into the rite of Mass except where the rubrics provide for it. For example, at each memento after the reception of the sacred host. So you might say something after receiving the host to yourself. But he says even if it's vocal, that would not violate any rules. Remedying additions to the rite. The directions of the De Defectibus do not, generally speaking, encourage the repairing of non-essential omissions. If the celebrant should omit anything belonging to the validity or the integrity, for example, the offertory of the rite of Mass, he must, of course, repair the omission. How any priest could not do the offertory, I'll never know, but if an omission be trivial, it need not be supplied, and may not be if it is not noticed at once. If an omission be notable, though not concerned with the validity or integrity of the sacrifice, that means outside of the offertory canon and communion, can be easily made good because, for example, it is noticed almost at once, and without causing scandal, it should be. Thus, if the celebrant omitted in error the Gloria or a commemoration or the Creed, he must not interrupt the Mass to repair the omission, but he may, indeed should, repair it if he adverts to it almost immediately. That happens, where you forget a commemoration, or you forget the Gloria for some reason, or forget the Creed. That's more common. You see that you get confused or something. You see, as I said, saying Mass becomes so automatic that you could be thinking about something entirely different during the whole Mass and still say the Mass correctly. That's how automatic it gets. So if you're distracted by something and you forget that this is a doctrine of the church and you don't say the credo, if you notice it right away, you just go back and say the credo, but you wouldn't interrupt the offertory to go back and say the credo. All right. Yes.
Sorry.
No.
Well, my question was answered.
Okay. All right. Now, material for the sacrifice. That the sacrifice of the Mass may be validly celebrated, the two things employed by our Lord at the institution of the Blessed Sacrament, wheaten bread and wine of the grape, must be used, for wheaten bread is, in the common usage and common opinion of men, bread, and the liquor made from the fruit of the vine is wine. So first the bread. In common usage and in the common opinion of men, and this is the criterion that is of importance in the matter, forget that number, bread is a food made from flour, moistened with water, kneaded, that means this is kneaded, and you don't pronounce the K in that for people, and baked. See, so common, is what is key is this bread in common parlance, common human estimation? Is this wine in common human estimation? That is valid matter. But it has to be wheaten bread. There's a lot of different breads. For the validity of the Mass, and so of the sacrament of the Blessed Eucharist, the bread which is used must be one real bread that is made from flour moistened with natural water and baked. Hence, all the glucose must not have been extracted from the flour, for this is normally regarded as an essential element in flour. So now there's this gluten business. I don't know if that's related to glucose, but the gluten is a natural part of bread. And so, I mean, certainly removal of all the gluten would be invalid matter. The question is to leave some of it. That's something that would have to be decided by the Sacred Congregation of Rites, which is no longer functioning. All right? Let's leave a little bit. But that doesn't help. I am told that gluten people, even a tiny bit of gluten is going to set it all off. Gets in the intestine and makes havoc. So it doesn't help somebody to be receiving a tiny bit of gluten. Yes.
Some people are celiac, they can't do any gluten, but some are just gluten intolerant and the amount actually does.
Really?
Yeah. How small of a particle of the host can you give them before it's not sacrament?
It has to be able to be swallowed. So you don't receive the sacrament unless you swallow it. So if it dissolves on your tongue, and if it doesn't have gluten in it, well, no, you're talking about something that has gluten in it, but gluten obviously keeps it all together. And but it has to be, it depends on the size of the host and the texture of the host. If it's a thick host, you might get away with a quarter of it. See, but if it's a very light, something like the host, the big host we have here, a very light host, that may not make it down. Yes.
Perhaps I misunderstood this, but I thought that also, Your Excellency, in conjunction with this, in terms of how much you could give someone, what's the minimum? It seems, is it correct to say that you can only break the host only so many times? I heard 3. You can break it into 3 parts. Otherwise,
I never saw a law about that.
it might just be a, it might not be a law though. I think
I never saw it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I just never saw a law about that.
I just recall a class that I had years ago with where we were using, not here, but the CMRI, we were using matters liturgical, and I think it came
Oh,
up.
maybe so. That's a very authoritative thing. Yeah. But I mean, the key is that somebody can swallow it. That's might be somebody's opinion about how much. I mean, unless it's SRC, but
That's what I was wondering.
you
I
know,
thought
it
maybe
might
was
be somebody's opinion that you couldn't go more than that. But again, it really depends on the nature of the host. Those hosts that you get from Kavanaugh are very thick. They're horrible. I hate them. No, they look like Novus Ordo. All I can think of is Novus Ordo. The large host is Novus Ordo. The small host pops out of your hand because it's so smooth, and the edges, I don't know, they cut them somehow, but the host looks like this. It's not exactly flat. The edges are pointy like that. And so you're distributing and it goes right out of your fingers. Pops on the floor. I can't stand them.
Your Excellency?
Yes.
What about with the wine regarding additives? A lot of wines
We're going to talk about that.
Okay. Oh yes.
Yes. If the flour be moistened with other liquids, for example, milk or wine, or a mixture, unless natural water is predominant, that is, forms about at least 2/3 of the mixture, it would not be regarded as bread and would be invalid matter. If rose water, that's water with wine in it, or other similar distilled liquids be used, the matter is at best doubtful. You don't see this much, although there was a case years ago of nuns that had an apple tree in the back of their convent and thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to make altar wine out of the apples? The mixture of flour and water must be baked, otherwise it is not commonly regarded as bread. So dough is not is no good. made of wheat, the variety or kind of wheat and flour that is used does not matter. So there's apparently different kinds of wheat, and I don't know much about that. I think, what is there, is it something about, what is the kind of wheat?
Your Excellency, the einkorn.
Yeah, there's some species of wheat.
It's the only wheat that was never hybridized. So the protein strands are very weak and brittle, which is good because it's easier to break down. So people who are gluten intolerant, they don't have as much problem with einkorn, but it is wheat. I was wondering about that specifically.
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter what it is. If the material is commonly regarded as wheat and flour, so that would be, see, that common estimation is, in the place where it is used, that's another thing. It is, don't forget, the sacrament is a sign. In other words, it has to have a meaning, and so the matter has to conform to what would be considered wheat in one place may not be considered wheat in another place. Yes.
So if you had some parishioners who were gluten intolerant, could you make special hosts out of something like that, einkorn flour, and try it, see if they react to it?
As long as it's considered commonly wheat.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the only, and I don't know enough about it to say yes or no. Mm-hmm. Flour made from other substances, however, for example, barley, oats, maize, is certainly invalid, while flour like that made from rye is doubtful matter. And if you're making hosts, you have to check on, make sure that it's all wheat and flour. Remember we were making hosts, remember that? And it said on the bag, 100% whole wheat. And you read the ingredients, there's barley in it. After we made some hosts. I mean, it was not significant, but it was. So make sure you really determine what it is. The addition of other flour to the wheaten flour in such a notable quantity that the mixture would cease to be commonly regarded as wheaten flour would make the matter invalid. 4. That the bread be valid matter, it does not matter if it be leavened or unleavened, nor does its quality, size, or shape matter. If it be truly bread in common estimation, it is valid matter. But that the bread be also lawful matter, it must be wheaten without admixture, mere triticeus. That means purely wheaten in Latin. Not only must other substances not be added in such quantity as to make it certain that the bread is not wheaten, when the matter would be invalid, or doubtful if it is, when its use would be gravely sinful, but they must not be added at all. Hence it is unlawful to add sugar or salt or other substances to the flour, or to add any other liquid, even in small quantity, to the natural water which is used to make the dough. Yes.
What do they mean by natural water? If we make hosts, are we not allowed to use RO?
What is RO?
Reverse osmosis? Because that's, or distilled water?
He talks about distilled water lately, a little afterwards. If it's H2O, how is that not natural water?
I don't know. It just seems a weird thing to emphasize. Natural water.
Yeah.
The only thing I ever read about being artificial water is cologne. I don't know what else is artificial water.
Eau de cologne.
I don't know what else is artificial water.
It doesn't mean purified water, does it?
I don't know what he means.
Well, maybe we'll just use Poland Springs or something. So if something goes again.
I really don't know what he means. It would certainly not be invalid. So it must be recently made. Bread that was corrupt would be invalid matter. That means, or bread that was beginning to corrupt would be doubtful matter. So if it's completely moldy, it's invalid. If it's starting to corrupt, it's doubtful. And its use gravely unlawful, and so the Church, to avoid all danger of corruption, orders that the breads for Mass and Holy Communion must be fresh. The general law does not determine how old the breads may be before they become unlawful matter, but theologians and rubricians declare, and synodal law in some places prescribes, that they must not be more than 20 or 21 days old when they are consecrated. Then ordinarily they should be, in the case of particles for Holy Communion, consumed within a week, so that in all they will not be more than 1 month old. The time that breads may be kept before there is danger of corruption will, of course, vary with circumstances, the climate, the quality of the flour, the nature of the place within which they are kept, etc. So there doesn't seem to be a law about the number of days or anything like that. It's just, it has to be, it can't be stale, it can't be, and again, everybody's silent about freezing them. It's very common that people are freezing hosts. Unleavened, while any bread, unleavened or leavened, may be validly consecrated, the priest of the Latin rite, wherever he may celebrate Mass, may lawfully use only unleavened bread. This is a grave obligation, and only in case of absolutely grave necessity may a priest of the Latin rite use leavened bread, for example, to complete the sacrifice. As if something, if a mouse comes and snatches away the host, I'm using an absurd example. If in order to complete the sacrifice, the only thing you can find is leavened bread, you could do that. Yes.
It's to be pure wheat bread and everything.
Oh, yes. But distinguish lawfulness and validity. You know, if it is commonly known as wheaten bread, but it has some other stuff in it, but not to the extent that it corrupts the idea of wheaten bread. If most of it is wheat, that's still valid. Yes.
Would it be lawful to use that in the example you gave?
Well, the mouse comes and takes it. Well, according to him, it is. So the idea of completing the sacrifice once it's begun is very important. Yes.
Yes, in regards to the wine, is there a minimum alcohol percentage?
Well, we did see already the 12%. I think that was canon law, I think.
Because Ratzinger, when he was prefect for the CDF, said that must, which is wine before it's fermented, so it's just grape juice. He said that's valid matter.
Yeah, there is some, I can look it up because I remember that, and I think I looked it up. There is, it's called the mustum. It has a slight, you're talking about fermented grapes, or grapes that are not, in other words, not like the grapes that you eat at table, but grapes that are ready for pressing, that there is a certain amount of alcohol in them. And that mustum is commonly considered wine. I'm not trying to defend Ratzinger, but I do remember reading something about that.
Just the document I pulled up, it says, mustum, which is grape juice that is either fresh or preserved by methods that suspend its fermentation.
Oh yeah, well that's invalid. No, it has to be common, in common human estimation, wine, even if it's imperfect wine. And there has to be some alcohol in it. Otherwise, it's just grape juice. No, that's for the drunken priests who should just retire and go to a house for drunk priests. They should. It's a scandal if they're drunks. They do have houses for drunk priests. Make sure you never find yourself in one. So round and complete. So it must be a round host and complete. Hostia integra. That the breads, large or small, should be round in shape in the Latin Church is a matter of custom which has acquired the force of law. B. Were the large hosts notably broken, it would be unlawful matter, but if a small part is only broken off, it may be used, especially if this is not noticed until after it has been offered at the offertory. So you should look at, most of this can be avoided by care before you start Mass. Because if you look at the host, and it's good to run your finger around the edge so that you have no particles falling off. Brush it off so there's no particles on it as best you can. And also, it helps to take the paten, and they recommend this, and run it over the back so that it splits well. Because many times when you split it over the chalice, there's an explosion and you see a particle or two go astray. That happens a lot. That's the reason why you scrape the corporal. But you would avoid that by weakening that bond there a little bit by the paten. No, you look like you have a question. Yes.
Well, it's an argument for the Romanesque chalices, right?
The Romanesque chalices, yes, you would have less chance of that. Yes, there were the high chances in the tulip chalices. They look nice, though. So, by a custom which has acquired the force of law, a large bread is used for Mass and exposition of the Blessed Sacrament, and small hosts are used for the communion of the faithful. The size for small, it should be small host, is determined. That should be are determined. The use size for the large host is from 3.5 to 3.5 inches in diameter, which sounds a little odd. For the small host, about 1.25 inches in diameter. An image of Christ, preferably Christ on the cross, may be impressed on the large hosts.